Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD, General Physician. All my video lectures are mainly for educative purpose. Today we'll be discussing on one of the very interesting topic which every day we see in and out, that is regarding fever. How you approach to any person who comes to you with fever in everyday practice. I'll be dividing into two parts. First part, in general, how you take history, how you examine, what you do in general if any person who comes to you with fever. And in second part, we'll be dealing with common different types of fever and how you manage those particular. So I will be dividing in two parts. The first part will giving an explanation what is fever, what are the different things, what you have to keep it in mind, etc. So we'll be talking in two divisions. So approach to common fevers. So basically it is very simple that fever is a symptom. It is not a disease. So being a symptom, you have to pay attention. Any person who comes to you with fever, you have to confirm that it is fever. And then you have to take a good history. You have to examine the person. And then you can decide regarding the treatment part of it. So we'll be talking on definition, etiology, general idea. And then we'll go to the approach to fever, what investigations you do regarding fever, and then in general common treatment for fever and some of the complications. So basically we always define in general fever is an elevation of body temperature exceeding normal daily variation, because we know that during a day our body temperature is little higher and during a night our body temperature is little lower. But whenever the body temperature is elevated about a certain figure, we always say that this is fever. So fever is indicated if the temperature is measured either by orally or by axillary or rectally or tympanic. Basically when you measure orally, it is higher than axillary temperature. We call as external temperature. And rectal temperature is higher than oral temperature. So indirectly axillary temperature, tympanic temperature, temporal temperature are nearly equal, and they are 1 degree less as compared to oral temperature. And rectal temperature is 1 degree Fahrenheit higher than oral temperature. Indirectly, rectal temperature will be almost nearly 2 degree Fahrenheit higher than axillary or temporal temperature or tympanic temperature. But in general, we say that if the body temperature measured by any one of these route is more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, we'll label that as elevated body temperature as fever. So, little introduction regarding a fever. Basically, fever means elevation of body temperature can be because of one, infective pathophysiology or non-infective pathophysiology. And among infective pathophysiology, it can be because of bacteria, virus, parasite, mycobacterium, etc. Or we commonly use the term microorganisms. And by non-infectious groups, also body temperature can be elevated. And that non-infectious group can be apart from infection, like drugs, malignancy, collagen disorders, etc. groups. We'll be talking further in etiology part. So fever is indicated when the body temperature rises above 98.6 orally or 99.8 degree Fahrenheit rectally. But we always say that normal adult body temperature is between 97 to 99 degree Fahrenheit. average we say 98.6 orally. But anytime if it is more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, we always label that as fever. Rectal temperature and tympanic temperature are 1 degree higher than oral temperature. And axillary and temporal temperature are 1 degree lower than oral temperature. This is roughly you have to remember. So there will be 4 different methods by which you can measure: tympanic temperature, oral temperature, axillary temperature, and this is called temporal temperature. This temporal and axillary are 1 degree less than oral, and oral is 1 degree less than rectal or tympanic temperature. By and large, the rectal temperature is highest than all other. In children, you can go for even this what we call as a chemical thermometers. So there are different types of thermometers. We'll be showing you one more slide. So there are 2 types of thermometer which can measure in Fahrenheit or which can measure in centigrade. So depending upon the type of thermometer, usually in India we use thermometer which are calibrated in Fahrenheit. So we'll be talking mainly in Fahrenheit. So if the temperature goes above 100.4, we'll consider that as fever. And as the temperature rises further, and if it goes above 105, 106, then the person will have very high chance of developing what we call as hyperpyrexia. And when the temperature falls below 95 degree Fahrenheit, usually person will develop hypothermia. So when the temperature goes above 104, 105 degree, the person will have a chance of developing hyperthermia, or commonly we use the word hyperpyrexia. We'll be giving you the difference between hypothermia and hyperpyrexia also. So these are all the different types of thermometers which are, this is chemical thermometer, this is digital, this is mercury thermometer, this is again digital, this is digital, but this is mainly utilized for tympanic. This is digital thermometer, this is digital which is utilized for axillary. So by and large, the commonest thermometer now what is being utilized is digital thermometer. So common, you can go for oral, you can go for tympanic, this is axillary, this is very commonly put on the forehead, we call chemical thermometers. There are some benefits of fever, because fever is a response to a stimulus like invasion by a microorganism, and body responds to that. And because of elevation of body temperature, there is increase in immune function. And this is because of increased motility and activity of white blood cell, mainly T cells and B cells. It also stimulates the interferon production, which helps in immunity, increasing the immunity. And it also increases the phagocytic activity. So basically fever is a response to infective pathophysiology or non-infective pathophysiology. But in infective pathophysiology, it will help by increasing the immunity. And it also inhibits the growth of some microorganisms. So that is a benefit. But with elevation of body temperature, person starts getting little discomfort in the form of headache, body ache, myalgia, joint pain, etc., which is a little discomfort. Person will have little loss of appetite. Those gives discomfort to the patient. That's why then we start treating those particular for lowering the body temperature. So basically we say that temperature more than 100.4, we call that as fever or pyrexia. Or when it goes above 104, 105, 106, we usually label that as hyperpyrexia. And if the body temperature is elevated without change in a thermoregulatory center, then we label that as hypothermia. So there are one term which is utilized, febrile also. So whenever the temperature is elevated, we call pyrexia, or we call fever, or we call febrile. And when the body temperature is elevated above certain figure, particularly we say more than 104, we use the word hyperpyrexia. And if the temperature is elevated without any change in thermoregulatory center, then we label that as hyperthermia. We'll be talking of that further. So hyperthermia is an unregulated rise in body temperature beyond the unchanged hypothalamic thermoregulatory set point. So there is no change in a thermoregulatory set point and still the body temperature is elevated. We label that as hypothermia. And this particular is very frequently because of dysfunction of body temperature center. We call as a thermoregulatory center, or impairment of a thermogenesis and heat loss mechanism. The most common cause of hypothermia will be overproduction of heat without non-infective pathophysiology, or any mechanism which reduces the heat loss. So your body temperature goes on increasing. Or there is a dysfunction of a thermoregulatory center and there is a gradual increase in body temperature beyond a particular set point. There is no elevation of a set point. Thermoregulatory set point is not elevated. So clinically, if you want to differentiate between hypothermia and hyperpyrexia, we say normally a daily temperature fluctuates. Daily temperature swings in normal person, but it will not swing in person with hypothermia. It will be constantly rising temperature. Hypothermia becomes very rapidly, the body temperature will be elevated very fast and it can be fatal because it is elevated more than even 105, 106, 107. So it becomes fatal. And as this is elevated without any prostaglandins, so antipyretic does not work. So antipyretic will work through acting on a certain chemical receptors, particularly prostaglandins receptors, or by acting on the thermoregulatory center in a thalamus. So as this hypothermia is because of other factors, antipyretic will not work. Hypothermia is characterized by unchange in a setting of a thermoregulatory center. So set point is not changed in thermoregulatory center. And hypothermia is often diagnosed by a basic event, and immediately after that the person starts having elevation of body temperature which is very rapid and can become fatal. Classical example, when he is exposed to say general anesthetics or to a drugs which is interfering with the thermoregulation. These are the two classical examples we call as malignant hypothermia or neuroleptic hypothermia. And good number of time when the person is exposed to extreme heat, external environment, and the heat loss from the body is disrupted, then there will be heat transmitted from external environment into the body by means of radiation, and body temperature will be elevated. Classical example is heat stroke, or we call sunstroke. When heat is without sun, we call that as heat stroke. And when it is because of sun exposure, sun heat, we call as sunstroke. So these are the two classical examples. So arising from the change within the body or by the change in the environment. Change in the environment, classical example, exposure to the heat of sun heat or external environment heat which is being produced by either some instruments or say furnace or fire, etc. While fever is because of release of pyrogens or chemical mediators. In hypothermia, set point remains unchanged or set point gets damaged, or the effector organs, that is the organ which is taking part in heat loss, they fail to do that function. While in a person with fever, the set point is elevated, and as it is elevated to a higher level, the body temperature will rise up to that level. So body temperature may rise very high in case of hypothermia, may go up to 105, 106, 107, and it can be very lethal. While this will go up to the set point where it is adjusted. While hypothermia will not respond to antipyretics, while fever will respond to antipyretics and other drugs. While in hypothermia, you will require external cooling methods. So antipyretic does not work in hypothermia, antipyretic will work in case of fever. Now I am going to a common general rules. So this is quite simple and it will help you very much in your everyday practice. Always remember, all fever are not due to infections. Infection means bacteria, virus, fungus, parasites like malarial parasites or tuberculosis. So you must remember, never think that all fever are because of bacterial infection and start antibiotics. Because fever can be because of non-infectious group also. And among infection, the most common cause, we say that almost what we see in your everyday practice, we see in our everyday practice. The most common cause of fever is viral infection. Almost 90% to 95% of upper respiratory tract is because of viral infection. Now, hypothermia, most common cause of hypothermia is because of non-infectious group. So indirectly, a good number of times, non-infectious group which elevates the body temperature can end up with hypothermia. Good number of times, non-infectious fever are usually low-grade fever. So these two sentences are contradictory. Say I am giving a simple example. A person with collagen disorders, person with malignancy, person with say doing exercise, anxiety, this will be all non-infectious group. But in this particular group, or indirectly we call as the group which belongs to a PUO groups, non-infective groups in PUO. Those are usually low grade fever, means they are just close to 100 and 100.4, 101, not more. But we call as hypothermic groups, particularly they are maximum, almost majority of those are all non-infective groups like malignant hypothermia, neuroleptic syndromes, serotonin syndrome, then even what we call as sunstroke, heat strokes, endocrine induced hypothermia. All these are almost non-infectious group. So if you understand this, it is very clear that all fever do not require antibiotic. Only if you confirm that this fever is because of bacterial infection, then only you need antibiotic. Say in case of a viral fever, antibiotic is not required. Viral fever and non-infectious, antibiotic is not effective. Central hypothermia, antipyretic is less effective. So in a hypothermia, if you give antipyretics, person body temperature will not come down. But if the fever is because of infective pathophysiology, maybe bacterial, maybe viral, maybe tubercular, will respond to antipyretics because it is because of pyrogens, or we call as chemical mediators. Commonest cause of hyperpyrexia may be non-infective or infective. This can be because of, by and large, we already mentioned that non-infective pathophysiology, which gives rise to hypothermia, will be mostly central, or maybe because of hypothalamic damage, or maybe because of heat stroke or sunstroke. And this will result into what we call as hypothermia rather than hyperpyrexia. But once in a while, P. falciparum, enteric fever, meningitis, some of the viral fever can produce a severe elevation of body temperature, but that we will call as hyperpyrexia. That will be not hypothermia. Hypothermia is very commonly, you will see, reduction in the body temperature will be very common in a shock stage, particularly in a septic shock. Also in a case of a severe shock like cardiogenic shock, and also over treatment with antipyretics. Any person who comes to with a prolonged fever, say fever for more than 3 weeks, 4 weeks, always suspect tuberculosis, malignancy, CA is malignancy, carcinoma, HIV, and pyrexia of unknown origin due to non-infective pathophysiology. If any person who comes to with fever with rapid weight loss, say within a short period, 2 to 3 weeks, person is lost 2 kg, 3 kg, 4 kg, then suspect tuberculosis, malignancy, and HIV. Indirectly, prolonged fever with weight loss, suspect tuberculosis, malignancy, and HIV. Hypothermia, most common cause is central, CNS damage, drugs, heat stroke, sunstroke. And they are very, very dangerous one, lethal. And always remember in fever, the temperature measurement should be by a good instrument. So proper thermometer, use the proper site, proper technique, and always keep a record, that is maintain the chart. And if you maintain the chart properly, we call TPR, then it will help you to find out the type of fever and also progress of fever and effect of your treatment. All fever with rigors are not malaria. It can be because of urinary tract infection. Even you can get little rigors in enteric fever. Also in case of viral fever. Do not start antibiotic before taking a history examination and confirming the diagnosis. Antibiotics should be started only after culture reports. Use whenever, if you want to give an antibiotic and clinically you are suspecting the person is having fever because of microorganisms and particularly bacteria, then as an empirical treatment always start monotherapy, never start polytherapy. Full dose for full period. Never give subclinical dose and for short duration. Look for fever whether it is community acquired or nosocomial, because in a nosocomial, if it is after hospitalization or after some procedure which is being done in hospital and then person has developed fever, likely to be because of resistance microorganisms and odd microorganisms which are not commonly seen in a community acquired. And in those cases, you might require a broad spectrum antibiotics, injectable antibiotics, you may require a polytherapy, etc. We'll be discussing whenever we discuss on antibiotics. Look for comorbid condition. Any person who has got developed fever, before starting a treatment, always look whether he is having diabetes, HIV, anemia, whether he is on some drugs, particularly like steroids, anti-cancer drugs, which decreases the immunity, which decreases the resistance power, or whether he has got any liver damage, renal damage, because majority of the drugs will be excreted by bile or by urine, and they will be metabolized by liver. So all this you have to keep it in mind before using any particular drugs, and particularly it is very important while using antibiotics. Does Doses will change with weight, with age, person with liver disease, person with renal disease, and during pregnancy. This you have to keep it in mind whenever you are going to treat with antibiotics or any drugs also. There is another thing. Any person who comes to with fever and has got this following symptoms and signs, it should click your mind that this is a bad sign and you must pay attention. You must get a good history, have a proper examination, do repeat the test, don't rely and don't make an idea that this is the only diagnosis. Think it over. Like any person who has got fever with altered level of consciousness like delirium, drowsy, stupor or coma, he has got persistent vomiting, distension of abdomen, temperature is 106, not responding to antipyretics, person has got oliguria or new jaundice appearance, altered mental status, meningeal signs, seizures, tachypnea, shortness of breath, signs of hypoxia, cyanosis has appeared, bradycardia, hypothermia, hypotension, symptom signs of shock stage, person has developed bleeding spots like purpura or petechial hemorrhages, or person is bleeding like epistaxis, hematemesis, or person has got what we call as mottled skin, which are the signs of DIC, or person has developed ARDS. All these are bad signs. All these are bad signs. Do keep it in mind. Now there is one particular variety of presentation which you will come across in your everyday practice. Person will come to you with a low grade fever, 101 for longer period, that is around 3 weeks. He is not an immunocompromised host, and you have done a good examination, you have taken a good history, you have done almost a common day-to-day test like ESR, CRP, hemoglobin, platelet count, leukocyte count, electrolytes, DC, creatinine, protein, electrophoresis, alkaline phosphatase, AST, ALT, LDH, creatinine kinase, antinuclear antibody, rheumatoid factors, urine analysis. Also, you have gone for blood culture, urine culture, chest x-ray, abdominal ultrasound. You have done a tuberculin test. Still, you are not able to pinpoint the diagnosis. We label that as fever of unknown origin. Now, this is one slide where I'm explaining in very short. If a person has got infective pathophysiology, like infection, microbial toxins, mediators of inflammation, or there's an immune reaction. All these three things, that is infective pathophysiology, which will produce microbial toxins, microorganisms are destroyed, or there is an inflammation because of other pathophysiology, say like autoimmune disorders, malignancy, trauma, infarct, etc. Different pathophysiology is playing a role, but in all this together, there will be monocyte response, macrophage response, and endothelial response. And they'll release pyrogens, cytokines, interleukins, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, interferons, etc. This will act on hypothalamic center, and by acting on hypothalamic center, it will release prostaglandins, cyclic AMP, and that will set the thermoregulatory center at a higher level. And by setting at that higher level, now heat conservation and heat production will increase, and heat loss will not be much. So that will elevate your body temperature. We'll label that as fever. Among this, if there is a microbial toxins, now this microbial toxins or infection which is releasing a microbial exotoxins. Now these exotoxins directly will act on the hypothalamic center. It will not release this pyrogens, interleukins, we call TNF alpha, interferons. They'll not release that. They'll directly act on microbial toxins, they are going to act directly on hypothalamic endothelium. Yes, they will take part in this also, but via monocytes, macrophages, etc. But also these toxins directly will act on the hypothalamic center, and via prostaglandin, cyclic AMP will elevate the thermoregulatory center. So antipyretics will be acting at prostaglandins levels and will be lowering your body temperature. So indirectly, the factors which increases the prostaglandins level and elevates the thermoregulatory center, your antipyretics will be working. While in a non-inflammatory groups, directly this particular center, this hypothalamic center is not changed. Either it is totally damaged or heat loss mechanism is being altered. So there is no heat loss. So person heat is preserved and that elevates your body temperature. Or there is a mechanism where there is an excessive heat production in the body and that is elevating your body temperature. But this thermoregulatory center is at normal level or it is destroyed or heat loss mechanism is not working or there is an external heat or internal heat production. Either external environment or internal heat production is markedly elevated, as in case of we use few words: malignant hypothermia, neuroleptic syndromes, endocrine crisis, particularly thyrotoxic crisis, or even in case of a pheochromocytoma also the body temperature can be elevated, and that we will label as hypothermia. So these are called exotoxins, these are called endotoxins, and thermoregulatory center has got information coming from the different parts, and there are thermoreceptor in skin also which will detect the external temperature, and this will detect the blood temperature thermoreceptor which is present in the hypothalamus. There are also thermoreceptor which are present in certain organs, and all those particular will be resulting into, will give a response as far as thermoregulation is concerned. Vasodilatation, so there will be heat loss, or vasoconstriction, heat preservation. Sweat gland will produce sweating, and that sweating will help in heat loss mechanism. Or there will be stimulation of sympathetic system and you will have a skin hair will stand up. So we call erective muscles in skin will be working. You will have a skeletal muscle contraction we call shivering, which will increase the heat production. So whenever the person has got lower in body temperature, shivering will take place, metabolism will increase, your metabolism will be increased by thyroid hormone and adrenal glands by releasing adrenaline, noradrenaline, and this will elevate your body temperature. While vasodilatation and sweating will help in heat loss mechanism. Now this input is given to the thermoregulatory center by a thermoreceptor which are present in say certain organs and in blood, particularly not in ideally in the blood, it is in a hypothalamus itself, and skin has got thermoreceptor which will give an idea regarding an external body temperature, and through that it will give you idea regarding environmental temperature, and then you will have either heat loss or heat preservation. So behavior adaptation will control the heat production and heat loss. The skeletal muscle will take part in heat production. Sympathetic system by vasoconstriction and vasodilatation will take part in heat loss mechanism. And also sweat gland will also take part in heat loss mechanism. So these are the four mechanisms which will be taking part in heat loss and heat preservation. Now if we go to the general etiology of what we call as fever, we divide into two big groups. One we call as Physiological, where it is because of slight increase in exercise, your body temperature will be elevated. Little stress, mental stress, physical stress can elevate your body temperature. After hot water bath, these are called physiological. They will come back to normal. While we call pathological means where the body temperature will remain elevated unless you treat that. Say like infective fever or non-infective fever. And there is another group where we use another term like PUO, where PUO can be because of infective pathophysiology or because of non-infective pathophysiology. Or you can have one of the group we call as a hypothermia group. And this hypothermia we'll be discussing separately. You can have a heat illness, which is one part of hypothermia group. You can have factitious fever, which is usually because of wrong technology of measurements, and one odd conditions where it is after starting a treatment, after using some drugs, and as soon as you stop those drugs, the body temperature comes down to normal. Those we call as a drug induced fever. Once in a while you will come across. So just little idea regarding that. So we always divide into two big groups, infective pathophysiology and non-infective pathophysiology, or we call inflammation. And then in neoplasm, we call that as non-infective pathophysiology. So infective pathophysiology will be viral, bacterial, tubercular, malarial, parasitic. Now this viral, tuberculosis, malaria and parasitic infections, they are non-bacterial, where antibiotic will not work. But all these five will be infective pathophysiology. While inflammation, very common will be autoimmune groups, malignancy. This will be non-infective pathophysiology. But malignancy will be purely non-infective pathophysiology. In miscellaneous also, central causes, heat strokes, sunstrokes. Central causes means central damage to the hypothalamus, or even a stroke can produce, means cerebrovascular stroke, can produce elevated body temperature, and we label that as central hypothermia. Another group, drug induced endocrine, can also elevate the body temperature and can go to the hypothermic level. Classical example in an endocrine will be thyrotoxic crisis. And any condition which damages the thermoregulatory center can also result into that. But from 6 to 11, all this will be non-infective pathophysiology. Infection can involve skin, bone, muscles, respiratory system, cardiovascular system. I am not labeling all those. CNS, GI tract, kidney, gynec, obstetric, etc. But endocrine will be mainly what we call as a non-infective pathophysiology. While all this particular, right from skin to this 8, that is gynec obstetric, can be involved by any one of these group. I am not dividing that separately. So among non-infective group, maybe because of injury, ischemic necrosis, cell necrosis, tumor necrosis, say maybe because of drugs like antibiotics, they can produce drug-induced fever, endocrine disorders, particularly thyrotoxic crisis, severe dehydrations, heat stroke, sunstroke, then barbiturate poisoning, cerebral hemorrhage. Some of the drugs we have already mentioned in this antibiotic, beta-lactamase, procainamide, Isonex, methyl-dopa, quinidine, etc. can produce fever. So this will be some of the group we will label, put them into non-infective pathophysiology. While as far as hypothermia is concerned, one of the classical example will be heat stroke, which we divide into exertional and non-exertional. Exertional is always after exercise. Non-exertional can be because of drugs like anticholinergic drug, antihistaminic drugs, anti-Parkinson drugs, diuretics, phenothiazine, etc. This will be non-exertional group, and it is because of exposure to extreme heat. This will be very, very common. While drug-induced hypothermia quite common with cocaine, amphetamine. I label very few. There are many more also, like salicylates, lithium, anticholinergic drugs, sympathomimetic drugs, etc. Neuroleptic malignant syndrome is most commonly because of phenothiazine group, while malignant hyperthermia is because of inhalant and anesthetic drugs and succinylcholine. While serotonin syndrome will be very commonly because of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, short form we call SSRI, or monoamino oxidase inhibitors, MAO, MAOI is inhibitor, MAO inhibitors, or a person who is on a tricyclic antidepressants. And very uncommon, not so common, endocrine disorders. And in endocrine disorders, you can put thyrotoxic crisis, and occasionally we call as pheochromocytoma. So look for non-infectious cause when person comes with a very high grade fever. These are all non-infective groups: heat stroke, drug-induced neuroleptics, serotonin syndrome, malignant hyperthermia, and endocrine disorders. All those are non-infective pathophysiology. So always remember, and in that antipyretic will not work. So you will have to find out whether it is heat stroke, whether it is drug induced, whether it is neuroleptic, whether it is serotonin, whether it is malignant hyperthermia or endocrinopathy, etc. You will have to find out those. So central fever, drug induced fever, heat stroke, HIV individual, malignant hyperthermia, neuroleptic syndromes, all will be non-infective pathophysiology. So heat stroke, non-exertional or exertional, drug-induced neuroleptic syndrome. I've selected few parts from this entire slide. Endocrinopathy, that is thyrotoxicosis, pheochromocytoma, and in CNS, intracranial hemorrhage, hypothalamic injury, status epilepticus, CNS infection, particularly very odd, but this I'll not put as hypothermia, but I'll say hyperpyrexia, that is P. falciparum, that we commonly label as cerebral malaria, or even in case of meningitis, encephalitis. You can come across with a very high grade fever. So this condition will be usually hyperpyrexia. All these other condition will be non-infective pathophysiology. They'll be more in favor of hyperthermia. In case of a PUO, we divide into four big groups: classical PUO and non-classical PUO. In a non-classical PO, neutropenic, we put them neutropenic where the person total count is less, and among that the neutrophil count is very low. We call neutropenic PUO. If a person has got HIV positive and he has developed a fever, we'll call HIV associated PUO. And if a person after hospitalization he develops a nosocomial infection, then we call nosocomial induced PUO. In classical PUO, there are three big groups. Particularly, we put infective pathophysiology, which is accounting for 40%, malignancy, which is accounting for 30%, and collagen vascular disorder, which is accounting for 20%. And when you cannot diagnose that into infective, malignant, or collagen vascular disorder, and in spite of a good investigation, we are not able to pinpoint the diagnosis, we put them into idiopathic group, and that idiopathic accounts for 10%. Now in all these particular groups, good number of times the fever is just marginally elevated, but more than 3 weeks. And even after a good history, even after a good examination and a routine laboratory test, you are not able to pinpoint, then we put them into a PO groups. So you will have to identify whether it is neutropenic, whether it is HIV induced or associated with HIV or nosocomial. And when it does not fit with these three and it fulfills the criteria of PUO, try to identify the cause of infective pathophysiology, malignancy, collagen disorders, and if you can't identify any one of these three, you will put them into an idiopathic group. Now, patterns of fever. Classically, we usually use few names very commonly: continuous, intermittent, and in continuous there is one more variety we call remittent variety. Then among intermittent, we use the word relapsing fever, undulant fever. There are other terms also being utilized like single spike fever, pale Epstein fever, low grade fever, hectic fever or septic fever, step ladder pattern, biphasic fever, relapsing fever, double quotidian, inverse fever, etc. These are the few words. Now you will very rarely find this particular pattern because self medications, poor treatment, incompleting treatment, the classical pattern are very rarely seen. And usually, very rarely, you maintain TPR chart. So you can rarely find out a classical pattern, but still I'll be mentioning few. So we always try to divide into infective pathophysiology and non-infective pathophysiology. But pattern will be different in different. Mainly in a non-infective pathophysiology, usually we don't get such classical patterns. It is more common with infective pathophysiology rather than non-infective pathophysiology. So after having a good temperature chart, now you will be able to find out whether it is continuous, intermittent, remittent, relapsing, undulant, etc. So we'll be going through some of those words. Now few words I'll be describing here and then we'll be showing you the temperature chart. In a continuous fever, usually second word we utilize is a sustain. And among sustain, there is another word we call as a remittent. Both this, there is a common word. The temperature is elevated above normal. What is normal? Less than 98.6. But when temperature is more than 100.4, we label that as fever. So body temperature is more than 100.4. But in 24 hours, it does not touch baseline. Baseline means it does not go to 98.6. Then we'll label that as continuous fever. Now in this continuous fever, if say body temperature is elevated and say it remains 104, 105, 104, 105 continuously in entire 24 hours, we will label that as continuous sustained variety. But say it is remaining above 100.4, but it is say fluctuating and fluctuation is more than 2 degree Fahrenheit. Say 105, 101, 103, then 105, then 102. Means fluctuation is there, but it does not come to the baseline. And fluctuation is more than 1 to 2 degree Fahrenheit. We'll label that as remittent fever. But if it touches baseline once in 24 hours, then we'll label that as intermittent fever. So if in 24 hours, if it touches the baseline without antipyretics, then we'll label that as intermittent fever. Or it is also called as hectic fever. Now there is another word we call is relapsing fever. Now relapsing fever means person will have a fever of intermittent variety, but it comes at regular interval, say every third day. Then we'll call that as a tertian. Every fourth day, we'll call that as quarter. It comes every alternate day. We usually use the word tertian. Say it comes at the gap of every 24 hours. Then we'll label that as quotidian. So these are the words. So if it comes on every fourth day, means at the gap of 72 hours, then we'll label that as quarter. If it comes at after a gap of 48 hours, so it is coming on say Monday, Tuesday, totally person is all right. And Wednesday again nearly at the same time. So there is a gap of 48 hours. We label that as tertian. There is a gap of 72 hours. So it is coming on the fourth day. We'll call that as quarter. It is coming every day. But there is a gap of only 24 hours. So we'll call that as quotidian. So these are the three common words which are being utilized. Quotidian, tertian, quarter. And in that, if you are getting multiple spike, following this pattern, then we label that as malignant tertian, malignant quotidian, etc. There is another term which is very commonly utilized is undulant fever, or it is called periodic fever, or there is a specific term utilized, pale Epstein type of fever, meaning Person develops indirectly almost like a remittent variety of continuous fever, which remains for few days, say for 7 to 10 days. Then person is apyrexic or we call afebrile for a gap of say again 7 to 10 days. Again he gets a period of remittent fever which is sustained for 7 to 10 days. This is classically described as undulant fever or periodic fever or pale abstinent fever. And classical example of that is Hodgkin's. And another example is called brucellosis, or brucellosis is also called as Malta fever. I have uploaded already one video lecture on brucellosis. I've also uploaded on even PUO. At your leisure time, you can go through that too, because I'm not going to discuss in detail regarding those. So I've already explained you sustained fever or continuous variety. I've explained you remittent fever, and I've explained you intermittent fever, which is classical in case of malaria. I've explained you quotidian, tertian, and quarter. So you can go through this slide at your leisure time. Now I'm showing you some of the pattern temperature charts. So if for one day you have recorded a fever and say the temperature, you can see here temperature is rising gradually like a step, and it goes to the maximum peak, and this is a baseline, and at the end of the day it comes down like a ladder. That's why it is called step ladder pattern. This is classical in enteric fever. But nowadays we don't see this variety of fever because of self-treatment. You will never see this classical step ladder pattern, or we call stepwise rise of fever. So this pattern is typical of enteric fever, but we rarely see that. Now another variety where you see this similar variety, you can see here that this is a baseline, it rises to a maximum peak, but there is a sharp rise, and then plateau is being maintained for few hours, and then it comes down. This is again a continuous fever variety. Usually we call continuous and sustained. It is sustained for some period of time, and then it comes down. This is very commonly seen in a viral infection. Also nowadays we see such pattern in a typhoid fever, and it may remain for few days. You can see here it will remain for 4 to 5 days. Again this enteric fever will remain for 4 to 5 days. So usually this will come down if you don't treat with step ladder pattern. Rise is step ladder pattern, while once a peak is reached it will remain for few days, and then it will come down sharply. This we'll call as crisis. So this is described as a continuous fever, or we call sustained fever. But when there is a fever but it fluctuates, you can see this is fluctuating more than 1 degree Fahrenheit, we'll label that as remittent fever. This is very commonly seen in a pus collection like say empyema, liver abscess, lung abscess, etc. Basically indirectly bacterial infection. Also you can get continuous fever in case of a central fever. In case of hypothermia, you will have sustained rise of temperature. Intermittent fever we have already described. You can have quotidian fever. This is double quotidian fever. You can have a tertian. I'll be showing you those slides. And that is typically seen in a malaria. Say tertian fever classical in P. vivax. Cotton fever classical in P. malaria. And quotidian fever classical in case of P. falciparum. So we'll be showing you those particular. So we also use the word relapsing fever. So if you see on every third day, see this gap of 3 days. So this will be first day, gap of 3 days, and fourth day again fever comes, cotton fever. And you can see this cotton fever is classical in case of P. malaria. That doesn't come in India. That is not common in India. Tertian classical example P. vivax, and P. falciparum will be usually quotidian fever every day, and you will come across multiple spikes. So we also call as malignant quotidian. And in case of a P. vivax, occasionally you can get even malignant tertian fever. But classical in case of a P. vivax, you will come across relapsing tertian fever. So gap of 1 day, and on a third day, you will have again a spike. Classical. Undulant fever, you can see that a spike, you will have a remittent variety, then person will be afebrile for few days, maybe 7 to 10 days, again you will have a same type of remittent fever. This will be classical in case of Hodgkin's, brucellosis, etc. It is also described as pale abstinent fever, undulant fever, or relapsing fever. So pale abstinent type of fever, classical, you will see, and where you will require NSAID for the treatment. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are more effective. You can see here, the person has become afebrile. Again, there is a remittent variety. This is classical pale abstinent type of fever, relapsing fever. And this will be double camel hump, camelback, or biphasic. You get a spike, becomes normal, again spike, so biphasic variety. Once in a while you will come across. We already discussed this. I'm keeping this slide for few seconds. You can have a pause and you can go through. You can see here, this is continuous variety. This is continuous, but you can see the fluctuation, gross fluctuation, but does not touch the baseline. So this is remittent. This is continuous sustained variety. This has come to the baseline, so this becomes intermittent variety. If it comes on alternate day, tertian. If it comes every day, one spike, but intermittent, then we call quotidian. If it comes on every fourth day, quarter. And if it comes, remains remittent variety for few days, and then person is afebrile, pale abstinent type of fever. So that will be typical pale abstinent type of fever, and person will be afebrile for few days, right from 7 days to 10 days. This is continuous variety, sustained. This is continuous variety, remittent. But see, this is rising. So this will be classical step ladder pattern. It is rising only. It is not coming down. And when it comes down, rises, step ladder, comes down this will be called lysis. Or some people use the word crisis. You can see this. This is remittent. This is drops by crisis, suddenly drops to a normal level. This is, you can see, 2 spikes in a day, every day, double quotidian. So there are 2 spikes every day, double quotidian, very commonly seen in a P. falciparum, very, very common. Don't go for all these conditions. These are not seen in India. This is tertian, classical in P. vivax, classical cotton, P. malaria, and malignant tertian, again classical in P. falciparum. Second way of classifying fever is acute, subacute, chronic. Acute means start suddenly, maybe a high grade, maybe a low grade. But when it remains for more than 3 weeks, we'll call that as a chronic. So depending upon the level of temperature, we call as a low grade or high grade, or very, very high grade, we'll use the word hyperpyrexia. Say more than 104, 105, hyperpyrexia. More than 101, 102, high grade. Say close to normal, low grade. Just borderline elevated, 100.4, moderate. 102, 103, high grade. 105, 106, hyperpyrexia. So acute fever, less than 7 days. Chronic fever, more than 2 to 3 weeks. Usually we say 2 to 3 weeks. So between 1 week to 3 weeks, we'll label that as subacute. Classical example of acute fever, malaria and viral fever. Classical example of subacute, typhoid fever, abscess. And classical example of chronic and persistent fever, tuberculosis, HIV, malignancy, collagen disorders, This will all be going for PUO groups. Low grade, we already mentioned, close to normal, close to 100, 101, moderate, 102, 103 will usually label as high moderate, and when it goes above 105, high grade fever, and when it is very very high, that is, this will be, I'll say that high grade fever 103, 104, more than 105, 106, hypothermia or hyperpyrexia. The commonest symptom which you come across along with fever, that is elevated body temperature, is shivering. So whenever person gets little shivering, we call that as chills. When it is markedly severe, we'll call that as rigor. And usually with rigor, the person will have a very high grade temperature. And little chills is to reduce the heat loss. And there is a little amount of vasoconstriction also. And because of vasoconstriction, decreased sweating, increased pulse rate, tachycardia, and slight increase in blood pressure. Good number of time person will complain of body ache, etc. And person might have malaise, anorexia. Because of decreased intake of food, there will be little cachexia. Particularly, this will be more common with tuberculosis, malignancy, and HIV infection. In viral infection, very frequently they will have a rash. So anytime any person who comes to you with fever with rash, invariably we always look for viral fever. And very commonly you will come across rash also in case of what we call particularly viral infections, and also you will come across rose spots in case of enteric fever, but not commonly seen. And then we go for a investigation. We divide into two groups. One, general investigation, which does not give you any idea regarding an infection, what is the infection, but it gives you an idea whether it will be bacterial or viral, that is total count, differential count. And we call acute phase reaction, right? C-reactive protein, or we call CRP or ESR. These are the two common things which are being done, but they don't give you any idea regarding the diagnosis. Now in fever, we have got certain phase we call as a baseline. Just it starts getting elevated. Then you get a chills where you start getting a gradual elevation of body temperature. Then there is a maintenance phase, or we call as a plateau phase or sustained phase. And then you come across a defervation phase where you start getting a loss of heat and body temperature comes down to normal. By and large, in any fever, you will have these three phases: warming phase, or we call chills phase; plateau phase, or we call sustained temperature; and then defervation phase where there is a heat loss. Here there is a heat production by means of a chills and vasoconstriction. Here defervation phase, you will have a vasodilatation and decrease in BMR and sweating. So here this is heat loss, you will have a loss of body temperature. So normally you get all these three phases very commonly seen in almost majority of the fever. So this is the baseline. You start getting a stimulus, that is injury of the cells, chemical mediators, invasion of a bacteria, etc., shivering and vasoconstriction, heat production, maintenance, sweating and vasodilatation, heat loss, and healing starts. Release of protective chemical mediators. But along with elevation of body temperature, there are certain things which are happening. Say in a central nervous system, the brain cells will have a little effect on the brain cell function. Person may be delirious, may have an altered level of consciousness, we call delirium, quite commonly seen with a very high grade fever, and particularly quite commonly seen in a typhoid fever. We call delirious stage. And when there is a severe hypothermia or hyperpyrexia, person can have an altered mental status, right from drowsy to a coma and seizures. In cardiovascular system, tachycardia, elevation of body temperature will also produce little amount of vasoconstriction, elevation of blood pressure. And then during defervescent stage, vasodilatation and loss of heat loss, that is quite common. But in case of enteric fever, you will have a relative bradycardia. So the pulse rate does not rise as much as which is parallel with elevation of body temperature. So with 1 degree Fahrenheit elevation, your pulse rate should be get elevated by 10. That does not happen. In respiratory system, usually it will produce little amount of tachypnea, which will be helping in heat loss mechanism. In digestive system, little anorexia, little decrease in appetite, quite common. And in immune system, initially there is a stimulation of immune system by which the macrophages are stimulated, production of interferons, etc. So immunity increases. At the same time, initially there is an increased metabolism to have elevation of body temperature, but when there is a severe elevation of body temperature, the metabolism may be affected and you can have a damage to the organs, and person can develop liver damage, renal damage, CNS damage, etc. can happen with just elevation of body temperature, and that is to a hypothermic level or hyperpyrexic level. And you can have a metabolic disorders of sugar metabolism, lipid metabolism, protein metabolism, water imbalance can take place, and electrolyte imbalance can also occur because of hypothermia or hyperpyrexia. This is just one slide where I'll show you in very short. This is normal body temperature. As temperature rises, you will have a sweating, tachycardia, tachypnea, severe sweating, then person will start developing dehydration, fainting episode, altered mental status, further elevation, you will have changes, and in the end if the temperature is elevated to 109, person can even die because of severe brain damage. I am not going into detail. So this is one slide which is showing you heat cramps may occur because of external heat exposure, then can go into a stage called heat syncope, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Already I have discussed this particular in another video lecture, you can go through. So do keep it in mind. Have a pause. This will be different stages in what we call as a hypothermia, which is because of a heat illnesses. Initially you will have cramps followed by syncope, then exhaustion, and then in the end person can develop a heat stroke. And what will be the remedy is being mentioned here. These are the symptoms, what will be there, and this will be the treatment, what you will have to do. Now as we approach to the fever, this is in short, we are going little faster. History is absolutely necessary. Physical examination, vital data including blood pressure, temperature, respiration, those should be done, and then you go for the systemic examination. Then depending upon your clinical suspicion, you go for we call non-specific tests like total count, differential count, ESR, hemoglobin. This will be non-specific. C-reactive protein, we call acute phase reactant. ESR is acute phase reactant. But for a specific diagnosis, say peripheral smear for malaria, urine examination for finding out urinary tract infection. If you are suspecting say enteric fever on 5th or 7th day, Vidal test, etc. Those are specific investigation to confirm the diagnosis. X-ray chest to confirm the suspicion of respiratory tract infection, but sputum examination will be important to confirm lower respiratory tract infection. Abdominal ultrasound, KUB, all those will be non-specific investigation, but that will give you an idea regarding renal involvement, etc. You can go for non-infective pathophysiology like TSH. You can go for blood sugar, fasting PP, RA test, SLE. This will give you a non-infective pathophysiology groups. HIV will give you an idea regarding immunocompromised host. And depending upon the suspected etiology, accordingly you can go for further investigations. So good history regarding onset duration, severity by recording the temperature, and then depending upon a high grade fever, you will suspect enteric fever, bacterial, viral, or P. falciparum. If a person body temperature is say 9900, you will suspect tuberculosis, malignancy, autoimmune disorders. If person has got chills or rigor, you will suspect malaria, urinary tract infection, viral or tuberculosis. And if you are suspecting after temperature chart, but by and large we don't come across a classical temperature chart which are described in books because of improper treatment, self-medication, over-the-counter treatment, uh, partial treatment, etc. We don't come across what we call as a continuous fever. I've already discussed in past previously recurrent, relapsing fever, intermittent fever, periodic fever, etc. Particularly in case of tuberculosis, you can have evening rise of temperature, low grade fever with little chills along with loss of appetite, little reduction in weight, etc. And when you get a specific symptoms and signs, associated symptoms and signs, urinary symptoms, cough, hemoptysis will tell you respiratory system, urinary complaint like frequency, burning maturation, hesitancy, it will tell you urinary tract infections, vomiting will be more in favor of GI tract, maybe non-specific also, a severe headache, convulsions, altered level of consciousness, more in case of CNS infection, but this will be also seen in case of hypothermia or hyperpyrexia. Fever with rash, more in favor of viral. Fever with jaundice, more in favor of liver, etc. This is the thing what we say that fever with associated symptom, CNS symptom more in favor of CNS, ENT, heart symptom signs, lung, GI tract, genitourinary, musculoskeletal will be non-specific, liver, etc. So this will be important from those particular. Some cases family history may be important because contagious disease will be seen in family. Classical example is your we call COVID-19, common flu, etc. In a past history of allergy, hospitalization, medication will help you to rule out drug induced or prior history of autoimmune disorders, malignancy that will help you to rule out those groups. Then even particularly social history is also important to find out the status of the patient, etc. So this is all the things which you should take in a history. We call associated symptoms and other history is quite important. And this is in a physical examination, eye, oropharynx, examine pulse, blood pressure, examination of hands, palm, nail, skin, then genital examination, abdomen, cardiovascular system, respiratory, CNS, head and neck, all those you have to examine. That will help you to identify the probable etiology. Now, I've already mentioned one relative tachycardia and relative bradycardia. Relative tachycardia you will see quite commonly in a toxic mediated infection, particularly classical example like gas gangrene, where you will have much more tachycardia as compared to pulse temperature relation. We usually say that with elevation of 1 degree Fahrenheit, you will have a rise in pulse by 4 to 10. Approximately we say 4 to 10. So there will be much more tachycardia. Classical example is gas gangrene. And in case of non-infective infectious causes, we call relative tachycardia, or we also use pulse temperature dissociation. And similar thing also happens in classical in case of enteric fever, untreated enteric fever, and that is also given one name that is called Fagett sign. Just remember this name. You can also see such relative bradycardia in leishmaniasis, brucellosis, yellow fever, rickettsia, etc. So just in your mind. Fever from cancer will be one variety which we call as non-infectious group of fever, and this will respond very nicely to naproxen rather than paracetamol. So this is also called naproxen test. So when you give a naproxen, fever response, it is very frequently in due to malignancy. So they call neprosin test. This is just out of way, not always. So just keep it in mind. No change in fever, it will be more in favor of infective pathophysiology. So if you are suspecting fever because of malignancy, just give neprosin. Person responds more in favor of malignancy. Person does not respond, try to rule out infective pathophysiology. Just out of way. It is not useful for differentiating neoplastic from connective tissue disorders. Just this is out of way. These are all the fever which are with rash. I'll be going through rubella, scarlet fever, chickenpox, measles. These are all we call as viral fever. But in a case of typhoid fever, you can come across rose spots. You can see this rash. I'll be showing you some of the slides. See, these are Koplik spots in case of measles. In rubella, this is called Forsheimer spots. This is typical rash in measles. This is in dengue. You can see this is typical in dengue. This is in chickenpox. You get vesicles. In mumps, you get a rash and you get parotitis. This is typical in dengue. Typical rash in a dengue. You can see this rash. This is in secondary syphilis. Secondary stage of syphilis. This is over the tongue. This is over the palm and sole. This is chickenpox vesicles. Classical vesicles in chickenpox. This is pustules in chickenpox. You can see this typical pustules. Very characteristics. You can have a pause and you can see to go through. This is in herpes zoster. We'll see along the trigeminal nerve. This is also called herpes zoster ophthalmicus, mainly along the supraorbital nerve. Along the supraorbital nerve. A division of trigeminal. This is in DIC. You can see a big ecchymosis, quite commonly seen. Also, you can see such things in a meningococcal. And when you see this with severe shock stage, we call meningococcemia or we call as Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome. This is meningococcemia. You can see these small pustules. And you can see this, even you can see gangrene. And then person can have severe shock state. We call meningococcemia or we call Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome. This is in scrub typhus. You see a typical this lesion. It is called Eschar of scrub typhus. This is erythema multiforme, drug rash, typical in a drug. Acute febrile illness should be approached with typical. So any particular person with a high grade fever, you give symptomatic. You can give antipyretic, but if there are life threatening, person must be hospitalized and you must get a good history, good clinical examination, routine test, and then you can go for specific test. Most common, you look for vital signs, pulse rate, respiration, look for tachycardia, bradycardia, relative tachycardia, relative bradycardia, respiratory rate, look for blood pressure, that is hypotension, shock, have a temperature record and charts, and observe closely, look for altered mental status, etc. And then you can go for systemic examination, have an oral examination, look for pustules, abscess, ulceration, auscultate for heart, auscultate for lung, look for crepitations. So respiratory signs, cardiovascular signs, palpate for liver and spleen, look for meningeal signs. These are all important tests you must look for. Now, if person has got fever less than 4 to 7 days, look for vital signs, give a symptomatic management. Focal signs are there, go for identification of the etiology and management accordingly. No focal signs, general management. And have a general examination like CBC, fasting blood sugar, urine analysis, chest x-ray, and if required, blood culture. No general signs, no danger signs, symptomatic management. But if there is a focal signs, examine that organ which is being involved. More than 4 to 7 days, now you will have to add certain other tests like blood culture, serological test, echo, and try to identify the etiology. And if there is a focal signs, have a thorough examination of that organ. Mainly the common investigation which we go for is non-specific like hemoglobin, TCDC. Specific investigation, malarial parasites, Vidal test, urine analysis. Most common. This is a must be done almost in all patients, even in whom you do not get a specific symptoms and signs. Very rarely we go for a blood culture. But sputum examination if the person has got a respiratory symptoms and signs. CRP and procalcitonin or ESR are mainly as a biomarkers, or we call as inflammatory markers or acute phase reactant. Blood culture will be done if we are not able to pinpoint. In a person who has been undergone a procedures like catheter, tubes, etc., go for a culture from those particular tubes. And depending upon the suspected etiology, X-ray chest, abdominal ultrasound, MRI, CT, PET MRI, or in suspected CNS infection, CSF examination, and in other groups, you can go for biopsy or drainage. In non-infective groups, TSH, also look for liver involvement, renal parameter, etc. There is one slide which gives you a little idea. If you have just done a total count, differential count, and person has got thrombocytopenia, if thrombocytopenia is with high hemoglobin, say 14, 15, so suspect dengue. That is because of hemo concentration. If thrombocytopenia is with low hemoglobin, it is mainly because of hemolysis, classical in case of cerebral malaria. And if there is a thrombocytopenia with normal hemoglobin but high creatinine, and that is very classical in case of a leptospirosis. Just one clinical clue from laboratory parameter. Very simple chart. If person has come with high grade fever, we put them into three big groups. No associated symptom signs and with associated symptom signs, or we call localizing sign. And third group, no specific signs and symptoms. If person who has got a no specific signs and symptoms, he has got just malaise, weight loss, weakness. Most commonly, always we suspect two common disorders in India is tuberculosis and HIV infection. So look for tuberculosis and HIV. That is the most common. No associated symptoms and signs very frequently, mainly upper respiratory tract symptoms and signs, we go for viral URTI. So we give just symptomatic treatment in the form of paracetamol and wait and observe. But if a person has got no history of exposure, is not having HIV infection, is not immunocompromised, and is having a fever for more than 3 weeks, straightforward you can go and label that as PUO, and you re-estimate or re-investigate again with CBC, ESR, liver function test. You can go for bone marrow, CT, etc. and try to rule out malignancy, abscess, collagen disorders, those groups. We call PUO groups. But if a person goes abdominal, has got localizing sign, respiratory signs like cough, hemoptysis, dyspnea, you have to investigate for respiratory system. Has got abdominal signs like abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, rebound tenderness, guarding, then you will have to undergo alimentary system examination. Urinary symptoms and signs related to urinary system, cardiac symptoms and signs, cardiovascular system examination, CNS symptoms and signs like headache, meningeal signs, alter level of consciousness, neurological examinations, and if person is undergone some procedures, then device related symptoms and signs, you will have to investigate accordingly. This is a very good slide. Take adequate time, go through at your leisure, and do look and proceed. This is the best algorithm you can go in any person who comes to you with fever. Best algorithm. Routinely, we go for urine examination, total count, differential count, look for malarial parasite, most common in India, and we try to look for thrombocytopenia. And I've shown you one slide. You can differentiate dengue, P. falciparum, and leptospirosis. And quite common in India, respiratory tract infections. In case of focal signs, chest X-ray in respiratory tract infections. In case of urinary symptoms, abdominal ultrasound will be helpful. In case of cardiovascular, transthoracic echo will be helpful. In suspected abscess, CT abdomen. In suspected CNS, you can go for MRI, etc. And these are all the investigations suspected CNS, CT or MRI. In case of abdomen, CT abdomen, abdominal ultrasound or MRI. In case of a muscle, etc., you can go for X-rays. In respiratory system, you can go for CT after X-ray chest, CT, etc. In general treatment, always wait and watch. By and large, the most common cause of upper respiratory tract is viral. You can wait and watch. You can just give symptomatic treatment. Reasons not to treat: because it increases the host defense mechanism. Fever is not the indicator of bacterial infections. It will also reduce the adverse effect of antipyretic drugs. It will also reduce iatrogenic stress, and it will give you a social benefits. So wait and watch. But if a person has got discomfort, always treat symptomatic, because it increases your metabolic rate, water loss, oxygen consumption, and it also produces tachycardia. So always keep it in mind to reduce the discomfort. So treatment of fever mainly is antipyretic, good nutrition, bed rest, and if required, you can utilize external cooling mechanisms. And if person has got toxic encephalopathy and delirium, always look for red flag signs. So look for those red flag signs. And if a person is having hyperpyrexia, hypothermia, it is an emergency. So general treatment: adequate fluid, electrolytes, nutrition, either orally or by Ryle's tube. And if a person has got persistent vomiting, by IV. Antipyretic or analgesic, by and large oral. If person has got hyperpyrexia or hypothermia, intramuscular or IV. And if a person can take orally, best is oral. In children, rectal can be one of the route. Very rarely we require Ryle's tubes. Hyperpyrexia, cold sponging, cold water enema, gastric lavage, and intravenous fluids. General for all: bed rest, personal hygiene, prevention, spread of infection, etc. You must do a thorough history examination and investigation depending upon the clinical suspicion. And always look for complication if the person has got hyperpyrexia, hypothermia, like MODS or septic shock. General measures in viral fever is good food, bed rest, have plenty of fluids, coconut water, the food which is easily digestible, antipyretics, and bed rest is a must, and look for complications. If the temperature is higher, tepid sponging, then cover the person, good plenty of fluids, keep a watch on urine output, and good ventilation, and a good breeze. Antipyretics, glucocorticoids is very rarely required. Very, very rarely you require glucocorticoids. Avoid glucocorticoids in particularly pregnant women, seizures disorders, cardiac disorders, hemodynamically unstable patients, altered mental status. In all these conditions, do not give, most of the febrile patients do not require antipyretic medications. So sometimes only glucocorticoid may be beneficial, very, very rarely. Usually we don't use glucocorticoids. Empiric antibiotics is rarely being started unless you confirm the diagnosis of bacterial infection or in an immunocompromised host. External cooling mechanism will be required in a person with hyperpyrexia or hypothermia. And always keep a watch in any patient who has got fever with seizures, altered level of consciousness, neck signs like neck rigidity, Kernick signs, or we call as Brudzinski sign, hypotension, shock, septic shock, severe respiratory distress, hypoxia, malignant hypothermia, heat stroke, etc. You must keep a watch. These are all red flag signs. If you clinically confirm the diagnosis of hypothermia, this is a slide which shows you how you manage a person with hypothermia. I've already discussed this in a one separate video lectures. You can go through at leisure time. So you can have a pause and you can go through. As far as complications is concerned, some of the complications which are very common like ARDS, DIC, renal and hepatic involvement, and person can go into AKI and acute liver failure. Hypoglycemia is quite common. Rhabdomyolysis can be common because of severe convulsions and severe rigors. And secondary to rhabdomyolysis, person can develop AKI because of myoglobinuria. Seizures are quite common. Seizures can also end up with rhabdomyolysis, and AKI will be quite common. You can have complications because of hyperpyrexia, hypothermia, severe dehydration and shock stage, electrolyte imbalance, metabolic acidosis. Hypothermia is also sometimes common because of excessive treatment with antipyretics and also a part of septic shock. Complication can be there because of basic etiology, and complication can be there because of treatment by different drugs and complication because of drugs. So I end my lecture here. I know this is an exhaustive lecture, but still this will be helpful to you in your everyday practice. In a subsequent lecture, we'll be talking on specific illnesses and what you do in a specific disorders. How you confirm, how you manage. If you like this lecture, please press button like and give your suggestion, comments. You can share with your friends. At the end of this lecture, I thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable and I appreciate that for spending some of the time with me. So see you in next lecture.